Welcome, friends, to another gentle tale from the Chestnut Hollow Journal. Today we return to the cozy woods, where small creatures go about their quiet days in warmth and wonder. Find yourself a comfortable spot, perhaps a warm drink by your side, and let's step together into the peaceful world of Chestnut Hollow. The lantern in the hollow. The first hints of early spring had begun to creep into Willowboro. The snow was retreating at last, melting into little rivulets that trickled down the sloping paths and pooled in puddles along the tree roots. Crocuses pushed their violet and yellow heads up through the damp earth, bold and cheerful, while the hedges wore the soft haze of swelling buds. It was a time of shifting light and the smell of damp bark, of breezes that carried both chill and promise. In a little moss-roofed cottage half hidden at the base of an ash tree, Hazel the mouse was fussing about with her broom. She always grew restless at the changing of seasons, feeling the need to freshen everything. Curtains washed, rugs beaten, cupboards polished. Pip, who had wandered over that morning with his paws in his pockets, leaned against the doorframe and watched her with mild amusement. "You've scrubbed the windows twice already," Pip remarked, his whiskers twitching. "Any shinier, and we'll see our reflections clear as pond water." "That's the point," Hazel retorted, puffing out her chest. "Spring sunshine ought to come pouring in without being stopped by grime. It sets the right tone for the season." Bramble the badger arrived not long after, carrying under one arm a bundle of kindling tied neatly with twine. He was always thoughtful about such things. Hazel's woodpile had been left sodden by snowmelt, and he'd gathered some of his own stash to see her through damp mornings. With him came the smell of leaf litter and wet fur, and he shook droplets from his snout as he stepped inside. "Wood for your stove," he rumbled, setting it near the hearth. "Spring may be nosing about, but the evenings are still sharp." Thistle the hedgehog, meanwhile, was the last to join them. She'd come from her burrow with a basket full of sweet new shoots she'd been foraging: sorrel, chickweed, and the tender beginnings of dandelion greens. "Good for broth," she said, patting her apron, which was already streaked with earth. "Cleans out the cobwebs winter leaves behind." The friends gathered around Hazel's table, steaming mugs of nettle tea and paw, and spoke of what lay ahead. Gardening, paths to clear, repairs to make where frost had bitten. Yet their talk soon circled to something else, something faintly unusual. Pip had heard it first, or so he claimed. While cutting through Willow Hollow late the previous evening, he'd spied a glow deep among the roots of a fallen elm. Not a fox, nor a firefly, he insisted, ears quivering with the memory. Too steady a light, like a lantern set upon the ground. Hazel gave him a skeptical look. "And you didn't go closer? Curious as you are?" "I did," Pip admitted, his tail curling nervously. "But when I drew near, it blinked out like a snuff candle. I waited, poked about with a stick, but found nothing. Only old bark and brambles." Bramble considered this with a slow frown. "Could be some trick of the hollow. I've seen fungus that glimmers faintly on rotting wood. Or it could be someone needing help," Thistle added gently. "A lantern left by a traveler, maybe?" The thought settled over them with a peculiar weight. The forest was their home, familiar in its nooks and pathways, yet every so often it offered something unexpected, a mystery, a change, a moment of wonder. And so it was agreed that the next evening they would all go together and see for themselves what Pip had glimpsed. That day passed in its usual busyness. Hazel hanging linens to dry in the breeze, Bramble mending the handle of a spade, Thistle stirring her early greens into a hearty soup. But as twilight deepened and the first evening stars pricked the violet sky, the four friends found their paws carrying them toward Willow Hollow. The hollow was a wide bowl in the land, where wind seemed always to gather in whispering currents. The elm that had toppled there many seasons ago lay half buried in moss, its roots rising like gnarled ribs from the earth. Moonlight silvered the clearing, and the air held that damp, loamy smell of thawing ground. For a while, nothing stirred. The friends stood quietly, listening to the drip of water from the branches, the creak of settling wood. Pip, shifting from foot to foot, began to wonder if perhaps his eyes had played tricks on him after all. But just as he opened his mouth to speak, there it was. A glow. It blossomed softly from within the tangle of roots, not bright, not fierce, but warm and steady, as though someone had set a small lamp beneath the earth. It lit the moss with an amber sheen and threw gentle shadows across the hollow floor. "There," Pip whispered fiercely, pointing. "I told you." Hazel held her breath. Thistle clutched her shawl, and Bramble stepped forward, his bulk solid against the uncertain light. They moved together as one, creeping closer until the glow flickered, as though aware of their presence. And then, just as before, it vanished. The hollow sank back into silence, leaving only the pale gleam of moonlight and the echo of their own breathing. No lantern, no candle, no spark. Hazel laid her paw on Pip's arm. "It's real," she said softly. "We all saw it." "Yes," Bramble agreed, his brow furrowed. "But what it is, that remains to be learned." They lingered a while longer, searching the roots and brushing aside moss, but found nothing save a scatter of beetles and a damp patch where water had pooled. At last they turned for home, their thoughts muddled with questions. Back at Hazel's cottage, the stove crackled and their mug steamed once more, but the memory of that glow stayed with them. It was not frightening, not in the way of prowling owls or sly foxes, but something altogether different, a puzzle wrapped in warmth, waiting to be unraveled. And so the friends made a quiet pact as they parted for the night. They would return again and keep returning until the secret of the lantern in the hollow revealed itself. The following morning dawned with a pale blush of sun behind a shroud of mist. Dew clung to every twig and blade, and the entire forest smelled green and raw, like something stretching awake. Hazel was already bustling when Bramble trudged up the path to her cottage. She'd risen early, as she often did when a question gnawed at her, and had taken to airing her bedding on the fence while humming under her breath. "Couldn't sleep?" Bramble asked, his deep voice softened by the hush of fog. "Not a wink," Hazel admitted, pinning her blanket to the line. "Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that light again, like a little heart beating under the ground." Pip scampered up. Just then, ears perked high. He had the opposite look of Hazel, not tired but restless, energy pouring out of him in quick movements. "We got to go back tonight," he said without preamble. "And not just stand about staring this time. We ought to dig or poke deeper into those roots." "Careful," Bramble warned. "That elm's been rotting for years. Too much meddling, and we could bring the whole tangle down on our heads." Thistle joined them last, carrying a satchel stuffed with little parcels wrapped in cloth. "For later," she explained, handing one each to Hazel and Pip. "Honey biscuits. Thinking is easier with a bit of sweetness." She placed the last parcel into Bramble's paws, where it looked no larger than a pebble in comparison to his wide palms. The four friends shared their biscuits as the mist began to thin, talking in low voices about what the light could mean. Pip leaned toward the fanciful. "A lantern left by some wandering spirit," he suggested, crumbs scattering on the fence. Hazel leaned toward the practical, maybe a trapped firefly colony or a trick of glow fungus. Bramble remained cautious but thoughtful, while Thistle simply nodded now and then, listening with the quiet patience she always carried. They parted ways after breakfast, each with tasks to mind. Hazel had her linens and floors. Bramble needed to check the riverbank where the thaw was loosening soil. Pip wanted to climb the hills for a better look at the season's changes, and Thistle planned to tend her herb bed. But beneath their chores, The thought of the hollow threaded through their minds like a current under the soil. When evening came, the friends gathered once more. This time, they carried tools, a lantern of their own, a stout walking stick, a little trowel, and a coil of twine. Hazel had packed a satchel with cloths and jars, just in case, though she couldn't quite say in case of what. Together, they picked their way to the hollow as twilight draped the land in indigo. The elm lay just as before, its roots sprawling wide, moss glistening with damp. At first, the place seemed quiet, ordinary, but as they settled into the clearing and let silence draw close, the glow returned. There was golden, pulsing faintly beneath the root arch like a heartbeat. "It's steady tonight," Thistle whispered, clutching her shawl. They edged closer. Pip, boldest as always, crouched low and thrust his stick into the shadows between roots. The glow dimmed, then flared like it was reacting. Hazel, peering, thought she saw not just light, but movement, a faint shimmer like rippling water. "Careful," Bramble warned again, placing a steady paw on Pip's shoulder. "If this is fungus, it could be delicate. If it's something else," he didn't finish, but the weight of his words lingered. They tried prodding, digging a little with the trowel, tying twine to a stick and lowering it like a probe. The glow reacted to each attempt, flaring, dimming, almost as though it were aware. But never did it allow them closer than an arm's length. Whenever they pressed too much, it vanished altogether, leaving them with nothing but cold root and damp soil. At last, breathless and puzzled, they sat in the clearing together. Pip huffed. "It's playing with us. That's what it is." Hazel hugged her satchel to her chest. It's guarding itself. Whatever it is, it doesn't want us too near. "Then we wait," Thistle said quietly. "If it is patient, we can be patient too." They did wait. Lantern light mingled with moonlight. Biscuits crumbled between paws, and the night passed slowly. The glow flickered in and out like a firefly caught in a dream. Eventually, weariness claimed them, and they trudged home beneath the stars, more curious than ever. The days that followed wove themselves into a rhythm. Work by daylight, watching by night. The friends made it a practice to gather at dusk and trek down to Willow Hollow, carrying food and blankets as though it were a simple picnic, though none of them called it that. And slowly, they began to notice patterns. The glow came most often when the air was still, least often when wind rustled through the hollow. It lingered longer when they sat quietly, flickered sooner when Pip grew restless and poked at the roots. Sometimes it seemed to grow stronger when Thistle hummed softly, a tune she didn't even know she knew. Hazel, who kept a small notebook by habit, began to write these observations down. She drew little sketches of the elm, marked which root arches gave off the strongest glow, timed how long it lasted. Pip teased her for her fussiness, but he also leaned over her shoulder more than once, eyes gleaming with fascination. It was during one such evening, while Hazel scratched away at her notebook and Thistle hummed, that something shifted. The glow, instead of flaring and vanishing as before, stretched outward in a thin ribbon of light, just a few inches, snaking along the root like molten gold. It didn't last more than a breath, but all four friends saw it. "There!" Hazel exclaimed, nearly blotting her notes. "It moved. It's not just a pool of light, it travels." "That means it's alive," Pip said, his tail bristling with excitement. Bramble raised his brows. "Alive, perhaps. But in what way?" The mystery grew larger, not smaller. Each visit layered more questions atop the last, until the friends found themselves thinking of little else. Even during the day, while sweeping floors or fetching water, Hazel's mind wandered back to the hollow. Pip dreamed of it. Bramble puzzled over it while sharpening tools. Thistle pressed herbs and thought about what kind of life could glow like that. Yet through it all, the forest carried on around them. Shoots grew taller, buds swelled, birds returned with morning chatter. The friends weeded their gardens, patched their fences, helped one another with errands. And always, in the evening, they found their paws carrying them back to that same elm. One night, after a longer watch than usual, the friends dozed off in the hollow itself, curled in blankets. When Hazel stirred awake at dawn, she saw dew glittering on moss, Pip snoring with his whiskers twitching, Bramble slumped against a root, Thistle wrapped like a bundle of laundry. For just a moment, she wondered if perhaps they had imagined it all. But when she glanced at the elm, there it was, faint, almost invisible in the brightening sky, but still glowing. The lantern in the hollow had not vanished with the night. It was there by day, too. This discovery changed everything. Until now, the friends had believed the glow a creature of night, something born of moonlight and stillness. But here it was, pulsing faintly in the daylight. More subdued, yes, more hidden by the sun's brilliance, but present nonetheless. They hurried back to Hazel's cottage for breakfast, buzzing with discussion. Hazel's notebook filled with more notes than ever. Pip proposed digging a trench around the elm to expose the roots more fully. Bramble countered with caution, pointing out that disturbing the tree's balance could harm the entire hollow. Thistle suggested gentler means, offerings of food, soft singing, patience, and so they experimented. That afternoon, they returned with small gifts. Hazel placed a thimble of honey by the roots. Pip laid down a shiny pebble. Thistle tucked sprigs of mint and chamomile nearby. Bramble simply laid his paw against the bark in a silent gesture of respect. The glow seemed to react, not dramatically, but subtly. It shimmered a little longer, pulsed a little brighter. Days turned into a week. Their routine deepened. Chores by daylight, visits to the hollow by dusk and dawn. The lantern became part of their lives, as natural as tending gardens or sharing supper. They spoke of it in quiet tones, like a shared secret that belonged only to them. Yet always lingered the question, what was it? One evening, as rain pattered softly on leaves, they sat beneath Bramble's great umbrella of an oiled cloak, huddled near the elm. Thunder grumbled far off. The glow pulsed steadily, ignoring the storm. Pip leaned close to Hazel and whispered, "Do you ever think maybe it's waiting for us to understand something? Like it's a message, not just a thing." Hazel didn't answer right away. She traced her paw over her damp notebook, then nodded slowly. "Yes, I think it wants us to listen." Thistle's humming joined the rain, and Bramble added a low hum of his own. The glow pulsed brighter, as though in time with their voices. And for the first time, none of them felt like outsiders peering in. For the first time, they felt like they were part of the lantern's rhythm, part of its quiet mystery. The storm passed. The glow lingered. And when they finally rose to go, Hazel closed her notebook gently and said, "This isn't just something to solve. It's something to tend, like a garden." The others nodded. And so, the lantern in the hollow became not just a puzzle, but a part of their woodland world, watched over, wondered at, cared for. The morning after the storm, sunlight glittered on every surface as though the forest had been dipped in glass. Hazel was the first to rise, padding barefoot across her polished floorboards to fling open the shutters. The smell of damp earth and pine swept into her little cottage. She smiled, breathing it deep. There was much to be done. The storm had left branches scattered across paths, fences sagging, and puddles shining in unexpected places. Hazel tied a kerchief over her ears, pulled on boots, and stepped out with her broom. She began sweeping away leaves and shaking out the mats at her doorstep. Not long after, Bramble appeared, carrying his sturdy spade. "Ground shifted down by the brook," he reported. "I'll shore it up before it eats half the path. Want me to see to your fence when I'm done?" Hazel thanked him warmly, and soon Pip came racing in, tail flicking water everywhere as he bounded from puddle to puddle. Did you hear? There's a tree fallen across the upper path. Perfect for climbing. Hazel wagged a finger at him. Perfect for you tumbling, more like. Take care. Thistle arrived last, carrying a basket of herbs wrapped in oilskin. The storm had flattened parts of her little bed, but she'd rescued what she could. Chamomile suffered, she sighed, but the mint loves a soaking. She paused to smile. I brought a bundle for drying. The cottage will smell fresh again. All morning, the companions tended to their corners of the forest. Hazel swept and scrubbed. Bramble dug and set stones to keep the brook's banks firm. Thistle replanted bent shoots. And Pip, after climbing the fallen tree, helped drag smaller branches from paths. Work went quicker with 4 pairs of paws. By noon, the forest looked tidier, and the companions sat together on Hazel's stoop, sharing a pot of tea and thick slices of bread with berry jam. Conversation, as always, drifted to the hollow. Do you think it shone through the storm? Pip asked between mouthfuls. It did, Hazel answered. We saw it, remember? It didn't falter at all. That's what makes me wonder, Bramble rumbled. Most things in the woods react to weather. The birds hush when thunder comes. The mushrooms shrivel after lightning. But that light, steady as breath itself. Then maybe it isn't of weather at all. Thistle mused, pouring herself another cup. Maybe it belongs to something deeper. Something in the roots or the soil beneath. Hazel tapped her paw against her notebook, which she'd brought to the table. I want to try keeping a chart. Not just notes, but proper records, marking the days, the weather, the glow's strength. If we treat this like tending a garden, we might learn its habits. Pip groaned good-naturedly but leaned closer, curiosity sparking. As long as I don't have to do the neat writing. The rest of the afternoon was spent in small labors. Bramble repaired Hazel's fence. Thistle strung mint to dry. Pip fetched pebbles from the brook to weigh down the journal pages, though Hazel suspected he simply liked collecting shiny things. As dusk fell, they gathered their bundles, tea, biscuits, the new chart, and made their way once more to Willow Hollow. The elm greeted them with its usual sprawling silence. They lit their lantern and settled beneath it. When the golden glow began, Hazel measured carefully with a bit of string tied to a stick, while Pip timed with his pocket watch, an old brass thing he had found years ago. Thistle sang softly under her breath, and Bramble leaned back, his broad shoulders steadying the group. Their notes grew fuller. The glow lasted 37 minutes before dimming. It brightened when Thistle hummed. It retreated when Pip prodded too hard. They added each detail to the chart, and when the glow at last faded, they packed their things, feeling oddly satisfied. Not because they had solved the mystery, but because they were slowly learning its rhythm, as Hazel had hoped. The next morning brought a visitor. While Hazel was preparing porridge, a knock rattled her door. When she opened it, there stood old Mrs. Wren, shawl tucked tight about her shoulders. Her eyes, sharp as thorns, studied Hazel at once. I've seen you and your friends skulking down to the elm each night, she said. Up to some mischief, are you? Hazel blinked, caught off guard. Not mischief, no, because I remember, Mrs. Wren went on, tapping her cane for emphasis. Years ago, when I was scarcely older than you, I saw a glow in that very hollow. Mark me, I thought it foxfire, but it never went out. Stayed steady for weeks, until I stopped daring to look. Too bright, too strange. Hazel's ears pricked. So it's happened before? Once. Long ago. Mrs. Wren squinted. But if you lot are poking it, take care. The forest has its ways. Some mysteries don't thank you for meddling. With that, she tottered off, leaving Hazel with more questions than answers. At breakfast, Hazel relayed the tale. Pip nearly toppled off his chair with excitement. It's older than we thought. That means it's something rare, maybe even magical. Or it means we must tread with care, Bramble said firmly. though his brow furrowed with thought. Thistle sipped her tea, thoughtful. Old, steady, resistant to weather, it sounds like something woven into the forest itself. Not a stranger here, but a part of the wood. They carried Mrs. Wren's warning in their hearts as they worked that day. Hazel scrubbed her floors. Pip scampered about repairing the treehouse ladder he'd half broken last week. Bramble sharpened his tools, and Thistle ground her for soothing salves. Yet each pause in their labors found them glancing toward the hollow, eager for nightfall. When they arrived that evening, they approached more reverently. Hazel set the lantern down gently, as though entering a chapel. Pip hushed his usual chatter, though his whiskers twitched with suppressed questions. Bramble bowed his head slightly as he laid his paw on the bark, and Thistle spread a handful of crushed chamomile near the roots. The glow appeared, steady, soft, golden, and for the first time, it stretched outward more boldly, tracing a line along two roots like veins of light. The companions gasped softly. Hazel drew the shape into her chart. Pip whispered, "It's showing itself more. Do you think it likes us being careful? Or it's testing us?" Bramble murmured. They stayed longer than usual, speaking little, simply watching as the glow pulsed and rippled. It felt less like studying a puzzle, more like listening to a story told in light. And when they finally left, they walked quietly, the night around them hushed and deep. As spring edged closer, the forest changed its cloak day by day. Snowmelt fattened the brook until it gurgled happily over stones. Shoots poked green noses through leaf litter, and woodpeckers tapped in the mornings. The companions tended to their tasks with renewed energy. Hazel planted carrots. Bramble turned the soil of his patch. Pip scouted for early berries, and Thistle collected tender leaves for teas. Yet the hollow remained at the center of their thoughts. Hazel's chart was filling quickly, each page neat with lines and notes. It's brightest when the air is still, weakest in wind. It lengthens its glow after offerings, especially fragrant herbs. And it seems to respond to sound, particularly humming. Pip suggested they try playing music. The next evening, he brought a tiny flute he'd whittled. The notes were uneven at first, squeaky enough to make Hazel laugh, but then the melody found a rhythm. And the glow did indeed respond, brightening, rippling outward as though the roots were listening. Excited, they tried more. Bramble beat a slow rhythm on a hollow log. Thistle hummed. Hazel clapped. The glow stretched in weaving lines, almost like a net of light under the roots. "Look," Hazel whispered, notebook trembling in her paws. "It's not random. It's shaping something. See?" Indeed, the glowing threads seemed to form a pattern. A curve here, a loop there, almost like letters or symbols. But just as the shapes grew clearer, the glow dimmed and retreated, leaving them breathless. Back at Hazel's cottage, they huddled over the notebook by candlelight. Pip argued they were letters. Bramble thought they were natural patterns like veins of leaves. Thistle suggested a kind of music written in light. Hazel listened to them all, her paw resting on the notebook. Whatever it is, it's speaking. We just need to learn its language. For the first time, none of them felt like they were chasing shadows. Instead, they felt they were part of a conversation, slow, patient, older than they could imagine. And so, the lantern in the hollow became not just a light to marvel at, but a teacher. A quiet one, yes, who spoke in pulses and patterns, but a teacher all the same. Days slipped by, gentle as the unfolding of spring itself. The companions settled into a comfortable pattern. Their ordinary chores by daylight, their quiet study of the glow at night. It was a rhythm as natural as breathing. Hazel was happiest when she had her paws ink-stained, poring over a notebook. She had begun to cross-reference her notes with the old herbals Thistle lent her, seeing if the glowing patterns resembled diagrams of roots or leaves. "Look at this one," she said one afternoon. tapping a curling loop in the margin of her chart. It's shaped almost exactly like the tendril of a pea vine. Bramble squinted, leaning close. True enough, but then this one looks like a river bend. Pip, lying belly up on Hazel's rug, groaned. What if it's not plants or rivers at all? What if it's simply light being pretty? Hazel chuckled and tapped his nose with her quill. Even beauty has a pattern, Pip, and patterns mean something. That evening, as they carried their tea and blankets to the hollow, they brought with them a new experiment. Pip had begged to try making music properly. He had coaxed Thistle into letting him borrow one of her little bells, the kind she hung by her drying herbs to chime in the breeze. Hazel carried a wooden spoon for keeping rhythm on her basket, and Bramble had reluctantly agreed to use his deep voice for humming bass notes. They set themselves in a half-circle beneath the elm and began. Pip piped on his flute, this time more tunefully. The bell chimed in delicate counterpoint. Hazel tapped the spoon against wicker, and Bramble's hum rumbled beneath it all. Thistle's voice rose last, soft but steady, weaving everything together. The hollow listened. The glow began faint, then grew, pulsing with the rhythm. When Thistle lifted her melody, the golden lines reached higher along the bark. When Pip squeaked an off-key note, the light hiccuped and shivered. They all laughed, which only seemed to make the glow shimmer brighter. Then something new happened. The pulsing lines of light curved and crossed, forming a spiral that spun outward, slowly but unmistakably. Hazel froze, her paw tightening on her notebook. There, see it? They all stared. The spiral wound outward like a seashell, delicate and perfect, hovering for several breaths before fading back into the roots. Bramble's ears twitched. That's no random flare. That's intention. Pip bounced. It's drawing for us. Hazel scribbled frantically. We'll need to repeat the same tune tomorrow. See if the pattern repeats or if it changes. They packed up reluctantly, whispering their goodnights as though leaving a dear friend. On the walk back, Pip kept replaying his tune on the flute, while Thistle murmured that spirals often meant growth or beginnings in old forest lore. Bramble simply trudged, brow furrowed, but even he couldn't hide the flicker of wonder in his eyes. The lantern was speaking, and for the first time, they were sure it wanted to be heard. The following night, they returned armed with determination. Pip had practiced his flute so thoroughly that Hazel feared she might go mad from the squeaking. Bramble had built a simple drum from hollow wood and hide scraps, muttering that it was for structure. Hazel brought parchment larger than her notebook to sketch patterns properly, and Thistle tucked bundles of herbs to offer in gratitude. They began their music again, steadier this time. The glow unfurled with the same grace, and when Thistle added her humming, the spiral returned, clearer, more brilliant, pulsing like the steady turn of seasons. Hazel traced each curl, her paw shaking. The spiral ended with 3 dots arranged like stars. There, do you see? That's deliberate. That's not just beauty. Pip nodded vigorously. It's like a message. What kind of message? Bramble asked. Thistle tilted her head. Perhaps not a message the way we write letters. Perhaps it's sharing itself, like roots spreading beneath soil, a pattern of belonging. They sat in silence, letting the glow ebb. The hollow seemed to breathe with them. Hazel finally whispered, "It feels like a welcome." From that evening on, their nightly visits became more ritual than study. They still noted patterns, of course. Hazel insisted, but they also brought little gifts. Thistle spread herbs of calming scents. Bramble stacked stones in tidy cairns. Pip scattered wildflower petals. Hazel laid sprigs of lavender. Each time, the glow brightened a little sooner and lingered a little longer, as though acknowledging their offerings. Meanwhile, the rhythm of their ordinary days continued. Bramble split logs and mended tools. Hazel kneaded bread and scrubbed her floorboards till they gleamed. Pip climbed trees for fun and fell into the brook twice. Thistle harvested nettles and brewed teas that soothed tired paws. It was life as usual. Only now, each task carried the quiet excitement of knowing that nightfall would bring them back to the hollow, back to their golden friend. One afternoon, while they shelled beans in Hazel's kitchen, Pip suddenly said, "Do you think anyone else in the forest knows? About the glow, I mean." They exchanged glances. Mrs. Wren, perhaps. Others might suspect. But none had been there night after night, watching it weave its strange spirals. Hazel tapped her spoon on the table. "Then we must be careful. Not to hide it, but not to parade it either. This is delicate." Bramble grunted his agreement. "The forest shares when it chooses. We don't own this secret." Thistle smiled gently. "No, but we can be its keepers, at least for a while." By the time blossoms dusted the meadows white and pink, the hollow had become almost like a second home. They spread blankets there, shared suppers under the elm, and sometimes napped while waiting for the glow. It seemed natural, like gathering around hearth. One evening, Pip begged to stay overnight. Just once. Imagine watching it till dawn. Hazel hesitated, but the idea tugged at her too. In the end, they packed baskets with bread, cheese, dried berries, and a flask of tea, and carried pillows to make a nest beneath the elm. The night unfolded with quiet wonder. The glow came stronger than ever, spirals widening across the roots, threads of light tracing upward like constellations. They lay together on their backs, staring up as the tree itself seemed to shimmer with veins of gold. "Do you hear it?" Thistle whispered. They listened. At first there was only the brook, the wind, the crackle of leaves. But then, faint as breath, a hum seemed to underlie it all. Not a sound of ears, but a sound felt in the chest, a resonance that matched the pulsing glow. Bramble's voice was rough when he spoke. "It's singing." Hazel clutched her notebook to her chest, though she couldn't bring herself to write. Pip whispered, awestruck, "It's like the whole forest is alive." They stayed like that for hours, watching, listening, feeling. No one wished to disturb it with chatter. At some point, Pip's eyes drooped, then Hazel's, then Thistle's. Bramble kept watch longest, steady as ever, until even he dozed. When dawn crept through the branches, the glow had faded, leaving only roots and bark. Yet the memory of its song lingered in their bones, thrumming gently. As they walked back, Hazel finally found her words. "It's not just showing us patterns, it's sharing its voice." Thistle nodded. "And perhaps, if we're patient, it will teach us to sing back." The thought filled them with a joy deeper than discovery. For this was no mere puzzle to solve, no secret to conquer. It was a friendship growing like roots intertwining beneath the soil, and they were ready to listen for as long as it took. Life in the forest pressed on, with all its little duties and interruptions, but beneath it all was the pull of the hollow. Each day, as they chopped wood or swept hearths or mended baskets, each of them carried the same question inside. How do we answer something that speaks in light and song? Hazel was first to attempt an answer. One afternoon, after scrubbing her floorboards, she sat at her table with parchment spread wide. Her ink-stained paws moved carefully, sketching the spiral from memory. She tried copying it over and over until the curves flowed like a steady river. That evening, she brought the page to the hollow and laid it gently at the roots. The glow stirred in greeting, threads of gold tracing upward. But the spiral did not repeat. Instead, the light shimmered in a scatter of dots, as though politely acknowledging Hazel's effort but not echoing it. Not quite right. Hazel sighed, retrieving her paper. The next day, Bramble tried. He dragged his small drum along, settling heavily beside the elm. His paw beat out a rhythm steady as a heartbeat. Boom, boom, boom. The glow pulsed faintly in time with it, swelling with each thrum, until suddenly it broke away, shimmering to its own rhythm, more complex, like water rushing over stones. Bramble grunted, lowering the drum. It doesn't follow. It has its own pace. Thistle's turn came next. She didn't bring parchment or drums or quills. She simply came with a basket of herbs, which she burned gently on a small stone hearth by the roots. The smoke rose, curling into shapes that mingled with the glow. The lantern's light brightened for a while, as if it approved of the offering, but gave no new pattern. Finally, Pip insisted on his try. He lifted his flute, puffed out his cheeks, and played the tune they'd used before, the one that had sparked the spiral. The glow answered, faint spirals curling, but weaker than before. He dropped his flute in frustration. It's like it's tired of us. Thistle chuckled softly, stroking his ear. Not tired. Waiting. Waiting for what? For us to stop trying to make it fit our way, Hazel murmured, staring at the roots. Perhaps it wants something else. Not words, not notes, not offerings. Something simpler. That night, they sat together without music, without drawings, without smoke. Just silence. The glow rose slowly, faint but steady, filling the hollow with a quiet radiance. They listened, not for patterns or spirals, but for the hum that lived in their bones. And in that silence, the glow lingered longer than ever before. From then on, they began weaving silence into their rituals. It felt strange at first. Pip fidgeted constantly. Hazel tapped her quill against her knee. Bramble grumbled that silence wasn't doing anything, but Thistle guided them with gentle patience. Listening is doing, she said. The forest speaks in pauses as much as in sound. Over time, they grew more comfortable with stillness. They would bring their suppers to the hollow, bread, berries, roasted roots, and eat quietly under the elm, letting the brook and the breeze fill the space. They learned to hear the faint hum more clearly, sometimes deep and steady, sometimes quick and skipping, like a laugh half hidden. Hazel noticed something curious one evening. When they were silent, Pip's paws would still twitch, Bramble's tail would flick, Hazel's whiskers would tremble, Thistle's chest would rise and fall slowly. And the glow seemed to mirror these little movements, subtle pulses and shifts of brightness, echoing the rhythm of their bodies. It's not just the silence, Hazel whispered, her eyes wide. It's the presence, the being together. Bramble rubbed his chin thoughtfully. Like roots beneath the soil, they don't talk, but they're always aware of each other. Yes, Thistle murmured. It's a chorus of existence. We don't need to perform. We just need to be. This realization deepened their bond with the lantern. They stopped fretting over whether their gifts were right or wrong. Instead, they simply shared themselves. Pip would hum quietly while stacking little towers of twigs. Hazel would sketch not spirals but scenes from their daily lives. Bramble splitting logs, Thistle harvesting herbs, Pip tumbling into the brook. Bramble would sit sharpening tools, letting his slow breaths mark time. Thistle often brewed tea over a small fire, the steam curling into the glow. And the lantern seemed to welcome it all. One night, after a long day of planting in Hazel's garden, they came to the hollow exhausted. They didn't even unpack their baskets. They just collapsed on blankets, too tired to speak. The glow rose gently around them, wrapping them in a cocoon of gold. For a long while, there was nothing but soft breathing and the rustle of leaves. Then something new. The glow pulsed in rhythm, brighter and brighter, until faint shapes began to take form. Not spirals, not dots, but outlines, delicate sketches of 4 little figures beneath a tree. They all sat upright, gasping. It was them. The light had drawn them. Pip's eyes shone. It knows us. Thistle pressed a paw to her chest, overcome. Hazel clutched Bramble's arm without realizing it. And Bramble, stolid, gruff Bramble, let out a long, shaky breath. The lantern wasn't just singing. It was seeing. After that night, everything felt different. Their bond with the hollow had deepened, and they carried it with them into their daily lives. Hazel began sketching not just the lantern's shapes, but the way its patterns echoed their own gestures. Her notebook filled with drawings of them drinking tea, planting seeds, carrying baskets, and golden lines weaving gently around those movements. She started to wonder if the lantern wasn't only showing itself, but showing them the hidden beauty in ordinary things. Bramble, too, softened. He still grumbled about Pip's chatter and Hazel's endless notes, but he began to bring more of himself into the hollow, repairing small tools there, carving handles, sometimes simply sitting with his eyes closed, listening to the hum. The others noticed that the glow always seemed strongest when Bramble was calmest, as if his steady presence grounded them all. Thistle leaned deeper into her lore, connecting what they saw with old sayings about roots, branches, and light. "The forest has always taught us to slow down," she said one evening, as they watched the glow sketch another spiral. "Perhaps the lantern is simply reminding us of what we already know." And Pip was forever bursting with excitement. He began composing little tunes again, but this time not to control or coax the glow, just to share his joy. Sometimes the lantern answered with faint swirls, sometimes it only shimmered gently. Pip didn't mind anymore. He had stopped asking why and simply celebrated that. One night, after a long day of gathering berries, they carried their supper to the hollow. They spread blankets, unpacked their baskets, and ate under the elm, laughing as Pip told exaggerated tales of his daring leaps across the brook. In truth, he had slipped again. The glow rose as usual, wrapping them in soft light. But then it did something extraordinary. Slowly, gracefully, the golden threads arched upward. Not just spirals or dots, not just outlines of themselves, but shapes resembling branches, leaves, blossoms. It was as though the entire tree was blooming in light above them. The four friends sat awestruck, bathed in golden petals that weren't really there. Hazel whispered, "It's showing us the forest itself." The petals drifted for several long breaths before fading back into the roots. When the glow dimmed, none of them spoke. Words felt too small for what they had seen. At last, Bramble rumbled quietly, "It doesn't want answers. It just wants us to remember." They nodded. That night, as they walked home under the starlight, they felt not like discoverers, but like caretakers of a truth older and simpler than any puzzle. A truth that lived in silence, in laughter, in bread shared and herbs gathered, in spirals and roots and branches, in the glow of a lantern that sang to those who dared to listen. And though they still didn't understand all of it, they were content. For mystery, they realized, was not always a thing to solve. Sometimes it was a thing to live with. The glow in the hollow became, slowly but surely, part of the rhythm of their lives. It was no longer a curiosity they visited, but a presence they wove into their weeks, like baking bread, tending gardens, or fetching water. Each of them felt it tug at some quiet corner of their being, asking not for devotion or offerings, but for honesty. Hazel was the first to notice a change in herself. She had always kept her garden neat and orderly, rows straight as a ruler, each seed sown precisely where she had marked. But one afternoon, as she prepared to plant a new bed, she found herself pausing, trowel poised in the soil. She remembered the spirals, those curling golden lines the lantern had shown them. And for reasons she couldn't explain, she shifted her rows into a gentle curve. The pattern flowed naturally, bending like the brook beside her home. At first, it felt strange, almost disobedient, but by the end of the day, she stood back and saw that her little patch of earth looked more alive than ever. Not rigid, not forced, but welcoming. She found herself smiling, as though she had obeyed a whisper no one else had heard. When she mentioned it at the hollow that night, Pip exclaimed, "A spiral garden? That's brilliant." "Oh, Hazel, You'll have flowers blooming in song. I just know it. Bramble grunted, though a glimmer of approval flickered in his eyes. Order has its place, but so does following your gut. Thistle only nodded knowingly. The forest never grows in straight lines. Hazel blushed under their attention, but when the lantern rose, the glow did something remarkable. It shimmered into a spiral, not in the air this time, but pooling gently into the soil at their paws. Hazel's breath caught. The spiral was not hers, not the lantern's, but something shared between them. That night, she went home certain of one thing. Her garden would never again be neat and rigid. It would breathe like the lantern breathed. Bramble was slower to change. He was practical, grounded, and proud of it. To him, the lantern was a wonder, yes, but one best left in its place. He had no interest in spirals or songs when there was wood to split and walls to mend. Yet even Bramble found himself shaped by the glow. It began with his tools. He had always been meticulous about them, his axe sharpened to a hair's edge, his mallet balanced just so, his chisels lined up on his bench like soldiers. But one afternoon, while repairing a neighbor's fence, he noticed how the grain of the wood curved, resisting his rigid cuts. For the first time, instead of forcing the timber into straight edges, he let his hand follow the natural bend. The result was sturdier, smoother, and, though he'd never admit it aloud, more beautiful. The fence stood not as a thing imposed on the land, but as though it had grown there. That evening, when he joined the others at the hollow, the lantern greeted him with a warm, steady hum. The light pulsed slowly, deeply, almost like the beat of a great heart. Bramble sat very still, his broad shoulders softening as he listened. He felt, for a fleeting moment, that the hum was in his own chest, as though the lantern had reached inside him. He didn't tell the others right away. Bramble wasn't one for speeches. But over the next weeks, they noticed his work changing. His carvings smoother, his handles shaped to the hand rather than to a measurement, his walls blending with the lines of the trees instead of cutting across them. And though Bramble still grumbled about Pip's chattering and Hazel's endless sketches, there was a new gentleness in his grumble, as if the lantern had carved something in him too. Pip, of course, was the most obvious in his transformation. He had always lived in noise and motion, skipping across stones, humming tunes, telling stories whether anyone listened or not. The lantern did not silence him, but it softened him. It began the day he tried, once again, to play his flute in the hollow. The notes came out lively, tumbling one over the other like cubs at play. But halfway through, he faltered. He had grown used to expecting an answer, the spirals, the shimmer. This time, however, the lantern only hummed faintly, not rising or shaping itself to his tune. Pip frowned, ready to puff harder, when Thistle laid a paw on his arm. "Don't play to it," she whispered. "Play with it." He blinked at her, then raised the flute again, softer this time. Instead of forcing the notes, he let his paws drift, listening for the spaces between sounds. His tune slowed, uncertain, almost fragile. And in that quiet space, the lantern glowed brighter, answering not in shape but in rhythm, a faint pulse echoing his pauses. It was the first time Pip had ever felt music as something shared, not performed. His eyes widened, and he lowered the flute slowly. It's listening. From then on, Pip played differently. He still composed his silly songs, still made Hazel laugh and Bramble groan. But in the hollow, his music grew gentler. He learned to let silence into his songs, to let space carry as much meaning as sound. Sometimes he even left his flute behind, humming quietly, letting the glow fill in the rest. The others noticed the change outside the hollow too. Pip grew better at listening, to Hazel's nervous rambling, to Bramble's muttered wisdom, to Thistle's long, winding lore. He didn't chatter less, But he heard more. And when he told stories now, they weren't just noisy bursts of imagination. They carried the hush of the hollow inside them. One evening, as they all shared bread under the elm, the lantern flared brighter than they had ever seen. It rose high above them, weaving not spirals or sketches, but a tapestry. Curves of gold twining together, lines overlapping, pausing, circling. They gasped softly, realizing what it was. Not shapes of themselves this time, nor blossoms or branches, but patterns of connection. Threads from Hazel's curved garden, Bramble's flowing wood. Thank you for joining us in the quiet corners of Chestnut Hollow. If you enjoyed this story and would like to wander with us again, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with others who love cozy woodland adventures. Until next time, may your days be gentle and your evenings restful.